Hello and welcome to a brand new episode of Airport CEO here on BongoPlanes. It is a brand new season, and after having asked the community what you guys would like to see in this season, I finally decided on a new location, and we will be working in Sandbox because we will be building another replica of a real airport, or at least we will try to be as close as possible to the real thing. And what the project is that we will be working on throughout season 4, we will talk about just after the drop. But before we get too far into today's episode, if you should end up enjoying this video, then don't forget to leave a like. That would be very much appreciated. And of course, if you are new around here, why not hit subscribe? Alright, so since we've last played the game in Season 3, there have been a few minor updates to the game. Nothing massive, but a few things have been added anyways, but we will get to them throughout this season when we are building the new airport. And of course, there might be coming even more updates because the game is still in beta and there are some updates dropping every now and then. But the big question is, of course, what is the project that we will be working on in this season? And there have been many really great suggestions for airports that we could build, but the majority wanted me to build a replica of a real airport. And for me to do this in a proper way, well, it's best that I at least have some knowledge of the airport, and in the best case scenario also have been to that airport at some point. Now that's of course because I don't just want to try to replicate an airport how it looks from the outside, so the layout more or less, but I also would like to try to replicate the functions of the terminal buildings inside, so how that is structured. And sure, I can do some research and try to find some material from airports inside, but it's definitely the easiest if I've at least been to that airport and have a rough idea about how it looks inside. And for that reason, the airport I have chosen for this season is Copenhagen Airport. Now, in the past, I have often shied away from trying to replicate larger airport layouts, and that's simply because the game world we had in the game wasn't big enough for that. But the game developers have now given us a larger game world, so we should be able to at least replicate large parts of the airport here in the game, at least from the space that is available. There are, of course, other things where the game maybe doesn't fully allow us to replicate it entirely correctly, but at least we can try to get close to what we have. The other thing that I simply find is that the architecture of Copenhagen Airport is interesting, especially of course Terminal 3 with a very prominent entrance and exit area, which is looking very nice. It's hopelessly inefficient, and we will, I guess, experience these issues as well in the game. But that's of course the whole part of trying to replicate these airports. We will experience the good, but also the bad things. Now, the architectural heart of Terminal 3 is an elongated triangle. At one end, you have a metro station accessing the Copenhagen Metro, and at the other end, you then have the entrance towards the security check and also the security exit for arriving passengers. So the building itself does actually look really spectacular in real life, but it is a bit of a mess because along the sides you have the check-in areas, but you also have some automated check-in counters in the middle, while you then at one end of course have the entrance to the metro station, but also a train station. And then on the other side you have the entrance for passengers going towards security checks, but you also have the security exits, so for passengers arriving to Copenhagen. So a lot of passenger streams mixing towards or in between each other. It's a bit of a mess, and hopefully we can recreate that, but hopefully we can also make it work so it's not completely Also, the shape of the building is a bit of a challenge here for me, as you can see. So the first attempt, that was a failure, so let's try it again. But the challenge is to make it a triangle, but that is elongated enough so that one, we have enough space, and two, that it looks like at least somewhat like the real building. Of course, we can't really, the game is grid based, so that does bring some challenges when we want to construct things that aren't entirely grid based, but we will have to do as good as we can. So the focus right now to begin with is just to get the rough layout of Terminal 3 onto the ground here. So we have more or less a rough idea on how that will look. Interior works will of course come much later. So I would imagine that, for example, the next episode we will be doing the similar work for Terminal 2, and then we will be focusing more on Terminal 2 to begin with. Now I can already see your questions, why Terminal 2 and not why Terminal 1? Well, that's because technically Copenhagen Airport at the moment doesn't have a Terminal 1. Terminal 3 and Terminal 2 are active. Terminal 1 used to handle only DK internal flights and has a few years ago been closed down. So that's why, even though we have the naming Terminal 2 and 3, we don't have 3 terminals, we only have 2 at the moment at Copenhagen Airport. Now, the reason why I'm starting with the rough edges of Terminal 3 is simply because Terminal 3 is the longest terminal by far. It stretches over the widest or longest area of Copenhagen Airport. So if we more or less can get the dimensions right of that part of the airport, we should have an anchor point or have like a reference for the rest of the airport. Terminal 3 is also, at least as far as I know, the main terminal for any wide body traffic, any intercontinental traffic. So I just want to get that part at least roughly spaced out, and that we can concentrate on all the other parts of the airport. So the part I'm working on here right now, this will basically become the part for the international traffic at the airport. So we will have to add security checks, rubbish and security checks, passport checks at this part, for example, for this entire arm that we will be building. So one thing that is also characteristic for this airport, which we of course also can see at many other airports around the world, is that we're not just having like one big square and then every parking position or every stand is just placed right at the terminal. Copenhagen Airport has, well, in many ways, or in some ways at least, a little bit of a complicated structure. And the gates aren't just placed just evenly alongside the building, because the building isn't just an even long square. This gives us an interesting layout when we look at it from the top, but will of course also give us a few challenges when we're building the building inside and placing the infrastructure inside that we need. One thing that I can already say now is that for large parts here at the terminal, the ground floor will only be accessed by airport staff. In many areas we'll probably actually not need the ground floor, other than for some service related things like, for example, luggage. The passenger streams at the airport, unlike for example with our last project, London City Airport, where the passenger streams are separated, so inbound and outbound. In Copenhagen that is not the case. Here the passengers are mixing and then just going towards the areas that they need to. So in that case most of that will happen on level 1, except for the entrance and exit hall of Terminal 3. There we can have some mixture between activities on ground level and activities on level 1. Another thing that we will experience here with this airport is that the distances that passengers will have to walk can be quite far, and the airport has barely any walkolators installed. And another thing we will experience is that many of these buildings are quite narrow, so there isn't much space to handle passengers that are waiting for their flights and other passengers walking towards their gates. So that will be quite interesting to see how that plays out. Now that I just placed down some runways, maybe we should also quickly talk about the layout that Copenhagen Airport has with their runways. So at Copenhagen Airport there are 2 parallel runways. That's the runway 22 left and right, or respectively 04 left and right. And they are then crossed by one runway, which is runway 30 or 12. Now we can't really place 3 runways down here because unfortunately for that we still don't have enough space, but we will have 2 runways. So we will have a runway which I guess would be 22 left, and we will have runway 30, or at least, I mean, the equivalent to that. I don't I don't think the game, well, at least I don't know if the game has gotten the numbers right, but yeah, there will be basically the runways that there are in real life and that we have placed more or less in correlation to the buildings. Then the next thing that we should also, of course, mention is that left to Terminal 3, we actually have a larger maintenance area in real life. I will have to see how I can squeeze that in. I'm not quite sure that we will quite manage. Also, I'm not quite sure that we actually will manage to get all of Terminal 3 in, because it is a terminal, not an airport, a terminal that stretches quite far. But we will see how much we get in there. Everything to the left of what we're building right now will be a little bit squeezed, and it will have to be a little bit of a compromise. But this part, at least as far as we can, with the game mechanics we have, should be more or less how it is in real life. As close as we can get us, at least. That's, of course, always the goal. So while I'm now starting here to work a little bit on the land side, although this will definitely still be changed because in the end I wasn't quite happy how it turned out. We will have to change a little bit the placement of it. But anyway, while I'm working on that, I think it is now time to end today's episode. It's a beginning, there's loads more to come. And while I'm not the biggest fan of the airport in real life, I do think it has many really interesting aspects that are worth trying to replicate. We will have some headaches, probably areas which might get heavily overloaded and where we might have to be creative and see how we can solve these issues. But I think, yeah, it has a lot of potential. The airport has a lot of really interesting architectural points that are worth trying to replicate and see how it works in the game. But with that, it is now time to end this video. So I hope you have enjoyed it. And if you have enjoyed the video and are excited about the new project, why not leave a like? That would be very much appreciated. And of course, if you are new around here, why not hit subscribe? That would be absolutely awesome. And with that, hope to see you in the next episode of Airport CEO. Until then, I'm checking out, and bye.